Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. Welcome to the latest episode of Sustainability in the Air. Today, we are going to turn the tables on ourselves. While I'm usually the host of this show, today I turn guest. In fact, there are two guests today. It's me, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying, and Dirk Singer, our head of sustainability. And the two of us are co-authors of a new book on sustainable aviation. And we will be interviewed today by Ayushi Batola, who has been usually writing all the articles and helping us with the podcast. But today she gets the hot seat and the great job of asking us the questions. So Ayushi, over to you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Shashank. Before we even get into the podcast and before I ask you questions, tell me, how are you guys feeling? I mean, you've been working on this book for so long and it's finally out. How are you guys feeling about it?
Well, this is obviously the first book that I've ever done. I mean, Shashank is a veteran compared to myself, and it's quite an amazing feeling to see in print the efforts where, when you've been spending 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning trying to churn out copy that is both sensible and insightful and that draws the reader in to actually see a finished product. So it's a pretty amazing feeling.
Yeah. Now, second, Dirk, I'm not a veteran by any order. I have, yes, previously published one book. This is the second book, and I decided to make this a little easier for myself by having a co-author. And trust me, the book is done because I worked with Dirk on it in record time. So it's a very exciting feeling. I think what we have in the book should change mindsets within the industry, outside the industry, on how we approach sustainability.
Well, amazing to see you guys so pumped up about it. And I would like to let the readers know that the book is now available on Amazon and the link will be available in the show notes. So please do check it out. Now, Shashank, I want to ask you, for 15 years, Simplifying has been a premier marketing consultancy in aviation, and we've been making airlines better. And now we're looking to make a foray into sustainability. So how did that transition come about? Can you share that journey with us?
Yeah, I think it's always important to understand the why. Interestingly, the why for Simplifying has never changed. 15 years ago, when I started Simplifying, the goal was, how can we help airlines build brand trust amongst travelers? And 15 years ago, in 2008, to build trust, airlines had to provide customer service over Twitter or sell tickets via Facebook or promote destinations on YouTube. At that time, by the way, it was Google Video, not even YouTube, the precursor. And then when we asked the same question again, let's say during the pandemic, the answer was health safety. Airlines have to get health safety right to build trust. And we focused on COVID health safety ratings and COVID testing. We launched an accelerator. Most of the team that we are working with today was there as well. And we helped airlines build trust. When we asked the same question once again at our 15th anniversary on how can we help airlines build trust in the next 15 years, the answer was starkly clear that airlines need to get sustainability right, both in terms of their efforts as well as how they communicate these sustainability efforts to customers, investors, other stakeholders, for example. And not every airline was getting it right. So as we dug deeper with the launch of this podcast, Earth Day in April 2022, with the launch of our Green Hub a few months later, as we wrote more about airlines, more about startups, more about technologies, it became amply clear that there needs to be a clear direction and a way to highlight innovators, which were the seeds of this, the idea for this book. That's where the book originates from. But if you were to ask me, we have not really pivoted or changed our core goal, which is to help airlines build trust among travelers. It's just that sustainability is how they will do that in the next 15 years, according to us.
Thank you so much. That was very well articulated. If I were to ask you about how you got into the book, why did you actually choose to write the book? And I mean, you mentioned earlier it was much easier for you to have a co-author, but tell us how that journey was, writing it together. How was it for the two of you?
I'm sure Dirk can add. Let me start this off first. When I wrote Soar, my first book, it was by far the hardest thing I had done in my professional life. It was really hard. It took 18 months. I experienced and truly lived out the writer's block. There was one time I remember being behind 25,000 words. And that was such a depressing day when I realized, oh my God, I have 25,000 words that I was supposed to have written. And it just was not an easy job. Yet, the end result was huge because a book reaches way more people than a podcast. A book reaches way more people than a blog article. A book reaches a lot of people and helps change mindsets where other mediums can't. And that's why we needed a book for this. Dirk, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many great stories of innovators that are waiting to be told, and it was great to sort of to take what they're doing and to bring it to life. In the introduction of the book, we actually talk a little bit about how so the sustainable aviation industry, it has echoes to the start of Silicon Valley, when you had innovators coming up with completely new technologies and and completely new ways of doing things that we take as second nature today. But that first started 30 or 40 years ago, and I think that in the aviation space we are at that point now. We've only highlighted a few of the stories that we could have done, but there were literally hundreds that we could have picked up upon. And a book, as Shashank says, is a much more impactful way to sort of to bring this to life. And doubtless we'll be having future editions after this where we'll be able to highlight other people's stories who didn't make it in this edition as well.
So, Doug, you also mentioned earlier that this is your first book, and you have, of course, spent a lot of white papers. You've spent several reports. How was this experience different for you?
Yeah, I mean, so for people who don't know too much about me, I mean, I sort of originally spent 25 years in advertising and PR agencies in London, and then moved into sustainability for Simply Flying in 2019 when flight shaming was first becoming a thing, and it was being seen, certainly we saw at the time, as a near existential threat for the industry. But in any case, having had this background of having churned around thousands of pieces of copy, I sort of imagined that I could do this, that I could just write full chapters. And you quickly realize that writing a 6,000 word chapter is very, very different to writing, a 200 word press release or a 500 word article or even a 2,000 word white paper. And I remember after finishing the first chapter, I sent it across to our editor, Ryan, for his comments. And it wasn't even a case that there were marked up changes. There were whole sections that were highlighted because the changes were so many that he had to just highlight complete sections. And my first reaction is like, gosh, I was just crushed. I was living under the impression that I could do this, that I could write something like this. And you quickly realize that it's a completely different challenge. And then, of course, I thought to myself, well, just get over yourself and treat this as a learning opportunity. And so I went back to Ryan, the editor, and I said, okay, for next chapters, I'm going to write as many drafts until I get this right. So you just tell me what is wrong with this, and I will then redo it over and over. So the first time around, I did 2 or 3 redrafts of complete chapters. But by the time we submitted the last chapter, there were only two changes. So so I guess that it was hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my career, but I definitely learned something from it at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible experience and a pretty new one.
Yeah, and exactly. While Dirk is at it, Ayushi, let me add of how exactly we split the process and how we worked this. Because we knew the book was going to highlight innovators, we knew that this was a book that will be based on primary research rather than secondary research. Most of the material in the book has never been published, in print especially. So we conducted over 300 hours of interviews. with over 50 innovators from around the world. And Dirk and I conducted the interviews together. We worked on the questions. Dirk wrote the first drafts based on those interviews, and then we went through the entire, editing, changing, moving process. So it was a long process, but like Dirk said, as we did it again and again and again, we became better at it.
Absolutely. It sounds like the process really finessed you guys. What I'd want to ask you next is, since you just mentioned that you interviewed so many people, and sustainability in the air definitely features the stories of innovators, how did you select those stories? Because zeroing down these stories must have been hard for you, because, there are quite a few things happening in the industry.
As you know yourself, because you feature a lot of them through your own writing, we've written about literally dozens of companies in this space. So it wasn't really a problem about finding the material. We actually had too much material. The issue was whittling them down into ones that we could choose. And I guess that the ones that we ended up selecting were companies that were, relatively mature on the pathway to commercialization. So someone like Heart Aerospace, they have significant investors and airline partners. Same with Air Company producing e-fuels. Zero Avia, hope to have their first engine certified in a little over 2 years' time. And that was really what we wanted to do, to show companies that had a certain amount of promise in terms of the outsiders. And I'll let Shashank answer the point about the insiders, the airlines that we chose.
Yeah, actually, to add to Dirk, let me zoom out a little. I think it's important for everyone to understand how we decided who should be featured. And that was a really, like Dirk said, there are lots of companies, lots of innovators out there. But initially, I started with the premise, hey, you know what? My first book had 8 airlines in it. Maybe I'll just have 8 airlines in this book. And Dirk and I shortlisted, I think, over 20 airlines, Dirk, when we started to potentially be featured in the book. And we started, digging deep into their sustainability plans, into what exactly are they doing today? What are their plans up till 2050? And we started ruling out airlines based on the integrity of their plans, or just whether it was solid yet or not. Is this third party verified or not? Very soon, we found ourselves struggling with less than 5 airlines that could potentially be featured. We reached out to all these airlines. And for some of these airlines, we actually wrote out full chapters after conducting interviews. And at the end decided, oh no, this chapter may not stand the test of time, because it's just that the airline might be at very early stages around sustainability, or that sustainability efforts are wrapped around ESG or CSR efforts. And this is a book which is called Sustainability in the Air, not ESG in the air, not CSR in the air. That's when Dirk and I, drew a line in the sand and said, you know what, we don't have to try so hard to squeeze airlines in. What if we make this about aviation? And that's what led to 2 clear sections of the book, which is the insiders and the outsiders, which is what Dirk was alluding to earlier. The outsiders are people with no aviation background. We have Heart Aerospace, building electric aircraft, Air Company, that is making sustainable aviation fuel by sucking carbon out of thin air. We have Archer, the eVTOL company. And we also have Zero Avia, which is looking to build a hydrogen aircraft. Those are the outsiders. They have no aviation background. They're new to the industry. And the other half of the book is the insiders. These are airlines transforming from within. Or these are people within aviation who are veterans, who are transforming from within, not from the outside, as the outsiders were. And these include Etihad Airways, JetBlue Airways, and JetBlue Ventures, on how they're reinventing their business model. We also have SkyTeam Alliance, highlighting multilateral collaboration. And finally, we have Embraer, which is an OEM, an aircraft manufacturer that is reinventing itself under the Energia platform and the eVTOL to rethink what a future OEM can look like. So it was a very enriching process overall, and a very dynamic one. We didn't just land, here are the 8 airlines or 8 companies to be featured, and then that was it. It was, a constant movement throughout. Like I said, we wrote out entire chapters and then decided not to include them.
Wow, that sounds like a very wide repertoire of companies that you possibly interviewed and have featured. And like you said, we can't just feature airlines. It has to be a broader approach. Otherwise, it becomes a little siloed. The next thing that I want to ask you, throughout this all, for you personally, what were some of the surprising stories or stories that you found inspiring? Maybe we can start with Dirk first.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great stories in the book, and there's a lot of, really inspiring stories about how, innovators in this space um, that they decided not to go down the road of, sort of embarking on a comfortable, well-paid career, where they might have been working for, let's say, an engine manufacturer, had a steady job and then working on incremental improvements of maybe 1 or 2%, annually, but decided to do something, radically different. Shashank's mentioned Anders Forslund of Hard Aerospace, but I guess one of the ones that sort of that really is quite unusual is the story about Air Company. And Air Company, of course, are making e-fuels, also known as power-to-liquid fuels, type of sustainable aviation fuel. But that's not how they started. They actually started by making vodka and perfume out of thin air, because obviously, if you take something like vodka, it's basically made out of ethyl alcohol and water. And then for the alcohol, you need a feedstock, which most people think is potatoes or grain or I believe fruit in some cases. But that can actually be CO2. You can actually make it out of CO2, and that's what they did. And they used this to really as a proof of concept. So rather than, it was their aim was never to become a luxury consumer goods company, but by making something like vodka, they had a product that they could sell at a premium. The world's first air-made vodka. They could sell it to New York restaurants. They then had something they could show, this is our technology, and we can apply this technology to other similar based process, one of which is making fuel. And the story behind the two people who created the company is quite unusual as well. I mean, at Simply Flying, as we come across startup founders all the time who have great ideas, but they have no concept of how to market themselves or how to position that idea or that product in a way that is compelling to external audiences. Now, Air Company kind of got around that because the two individuals who set it up, on one hand, you've got Dr. Stafford or Staff Sheehan, who is a Yale graduate, an incredibly brainy guy with, various patents to his name. And he is, he's a scientist, but he recognizes that very often in these companies, the scientists and technologists are not the best people to run the company. So at a Forbes under 30 marketing event, a few years back, he met his now business partner, who's Gregory Constantine, who came from Australia, who worked for Diageo in New York, which is obviously the world's largest drinks brand. So he has experience as a drinks marketer. And he is now very much the face of the company. And the way that they divide it is, staff in the background, he works in the technology, and Greg is the public face who can position it, who can brand it, who can explain it in a compelling way, and really kind of create a bit of pizzazz and a bit of charisma around it. And based on the back of that combination, they've been very successful. I mean, they've raised money from JetBlue Ventures, we feature in the book. They've got airline partners on board that include, Air Canada and Virgin Atlantic, and also JetBlue. And what they're doing is really revolutionary. But had they not had those key ingredients within their story, I'm not sure they would have been as successful as they are today.
One of my favorites is not just what Dirk shared about Air Company. It's truly inspiring. I recently did a private launch for the book at the SkyTeam Sustainable Flight Challenge ceremony, which was held at the Delta hangar in Atlanta. And what I found inspiring was how the SkyTeam Alliance, which is a multilateral alliance, they don't control what airlines do. They only help instigate airlines or push airlines forward in their sustainability journeys. They've been running this SkyTeam Sustainable Flight Challenge for a couple of years. Large majority of the SkyTeam member airlines participate in this challenge, in which they take a multitude of sustainability initiatives in flight, on the ground, as well as things like carrying staff, and then they have some sort of friendly competition on who was the boldest, or who won in customer collaboration, or who reduced the waste the most in flight. And what I found inspiring was not just the measures that were being taken, but also how culture within some of these smaller airlines was changing to support sustainability initiatives. You might think, oh, large SkyTeam airlines like Delta, Air France, and KLM would definitely be up there when it comes to sustainability initiatives. But some of the surprising ones were the likes of China Airlines or Saudia, which won a number of awards for engaging customers, for taking a lot of measures in flight. Kenya Airways, which had organic farm to table food, which was served in flight, reducing end-to-end carbon footprint of the food itself being served. It was very inspiring to see small airlines from different corners of the world doing their own bit. And all of this is leading to cultural change where many people who traditionally would not have thought about sustainability are thinking about it actively on a day-to-day basis. We need this cultural and mindset shift, and I felt SkyTeam is doing a good job and a very underappreciated job right now at it because not many people know about it. So I'm quite excited about some of these stories that we will be sharing through this book.
Thank you for the detailed answer. Those are like two very different things that you touched upon. And I think that's the thing about sustainability. We need a diverse set of initiatives to finally get to net zero. Now that we know that there are a diverse set of initiatives that we actually need, personally, which technology are you really rooting for? In, say, electric, SAF, hydrogen? Which one do you think is most promising at the moment?
I think it has to be all of the above. And that's a point that we made in the recent hydrogen report that we published. I mean, if you take something like hydrogen, actually any technology, you have an enormous amount of, opponents and fans. And the opponents can sometimes be incredibly noisy. Like with hydrogen, you have a full body which exists, sort of academics to sort of who try to prove why hydrogen aviation isn't all that it's cut out to be. But it really has to be all of the above. I mean, we're in we have less than 30 years to reach net zero. And we need every single tool in the toolbox. And obviously, they're all going to have different, different functions. So, when it comes to the thousands of aircraft, to the 23,000 aircraft that are still flying today, we're going to need sustainable aviation fuel because, those aircraft are going to be in the sky for the next 20, 30 years. And we need a drop in fuel. So that's why SAF is important. Electric does have considerable potential to, to disrupt commuter routes and short regional aviation in particular, and could even extend, air travel to a lot of communities that have been cut off, from air travel over the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, one of the things that Anders Forstlund, the CEO of Hot Aerospace, the point that he makes is he very often shows a map of the number of small towns and communities in the USA which had regional air services, in the 1990s. And they were all cut because regional aviation is very often it's expensive. You don't have a lot of passengers to fill the route, and the planes are expensive to operate. So there's a potential for sort of electric aviation to really rejuvenate a lot of shorter haul routes. And then hydrogen, hydrogen can sort of fit somewhere in between. I mean, obviously we have sort of engine makers like ZeroAvia who are producing hydrogen electric powertrains. They will initially work on small regional aircraft. The idea is that to move that to sort of to 80 to 100-seater aircraft, and I believe that they have bigger ambitions beyond that as well. And then, of course, you have the likes of Airbus who are working on sort of hydrogen combustion directly into their aircraft and hope to have a narrow body, plane the size of maybe an A319 or A320 in the skies by the middle of the next decade. So, in short, they all fill different roles, but we need all of them. We need absolutely everything, bearing in mind the relatively short amount of time, which is less than a single generation lifespan of an aircraft between now and 2050.
We've talked about the innovations quite a bit now, so maybe let's try to mix it up. While we have these innovations, there are also roadblocks to actually achieving them. Say there are cultural differences, there are hindrances towards investment, regulation. Of these, which do you think are being the major hurdles to realizing a net zero 2050?
Let me go back to 15 years ago when I came into the industry as an outsider saying, oh, you know what, guys, social media is not a fad. You have to take digital seriously. You have to look at the mobile customer journey, look at the silent traveler as a persona. It was very hard to change mindsets. I think mindset is what needs changing first for any actions and steps to be taken. The investment, the technologies, the funding can follow. But the airline executives have to first decide. They don't have to dig trenches, you have to build bridges when it comes to trying something new. And they have to take a decision internally that the only way of doing things was not the way that they did it in the past. There are new ways of doing things. The industry is changing. Let us recognize that and then embrace it. I'm not saying we go for degrowth tomorrow, but let us have very clear steps towards decarbonization, not in 2050 only, not when your government mandates it, but because we want to make sure that travel remains a force for good in the future. And that's very important. Mindset, I think, is where it begins. Dirk, what do you think?
Money. It all comes down to money. We can see, we personally each know dozens of innovators who've been, who have great ideas that are still on the drawing board that have got nowhere because of investment. In fact, in one of the chapters, we talk about Adam Goldstein, the CEO of Archer, and he says that one of the reasons why, the number of eVTOL companies that will probably make it in the end will be in single figures, as opposed to the hundreds that are in development. And he says the key barrier is cash, as simple as that. Because it takes, it can take $1 billion to bring a clean sheet aircraft to market from start to finish, because it can take 5 years or more throughout the whole process, through which you're not really earning anything. And throughout that process, you have to obviously, you have to do the design, you have to do the business case, you have to hire people, and those people, they can't just be, sort of people out of college. These have to be experienced engineers and scientists and business people and practitioners, who know about, everything from testing to regulation to certification to design, and that obviously counts for a premium. Then, of course, you have to, produce your aircraft. Then you have to test it. Then you have to go through the certification phase. Then you have to market it. All that, as I said, takes years throughout which you're not earning anything. And so the biggest hurdle to overcome that really is cash, and that's why so many haven't made it, despite the fact that they have some really great ideas which could be revolutionary.
Okay, so Dirk, let me ask you a follow-up on that one. If you, since you say it's all about money, if you actually had $1 billion, which, you always talk to us about quite a bit, do you think that guarantees you success? What other factors do you think would be at play there?
I mean, obviously, if you have $1 billion to invest, it's like any investment. You're never going to have a guarantee of success. But the fact is that, as a climate tech, so the wider climate tech market, not only looking at aviation, is talked about as, as a $1 trillion opportunity. There a number of VCs have said that this sector will succeed because it has to. It just has to. That there are industries like aviation which have to be decarbonized, and that's why I think that that if you're listening to this, if you're an investor, and if you do have $1 billion to invest, this would actually be a good place to put it. Now, leading on to that, the question, I guess, maybe follow up is if I had $1 billion, where would I put it? I personally would invest in an electrolyzer company, because electrolyzers are obviously the tools that help produce green hydrogen that split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, green hydrogen is incredibly important for two reasons. Number one, it is one of the base ingredients of so-called e-fuels that companies like Air Company or 12 or Circularity need to sort of to make their e-fuel. And then, of course, a number of companies are using hydrogen as a fuel source in any case in their aircraft. So if I personally had $1 billion, that is where I would put it, because cheaper and and more effective green hydrogen production, I think, could really unlock a lot, not only in our own sector, but in a lot of other sectors as well.
So, well, we know where Dirk's $1 billion are going. My next question is for Shashank. We know, and of course people say that aviation is hard to decarbonize. There are no immediate solutions that we have. So why should someone invest $1 billion in aviation to decarbonize it?
Well, I think that goes back to the fundamental of, is air travel needed? Why is air travel important for humanity? I am a product of aviation. Dirk, too, I believe. We've both lived in multiple places around the world. I now live in London as of this year. My family lives in Canada. My grandmother is in India. I grew up in Singapore. And it's not just about me personally. How much of life would exist as we know it today had it not been for air travel? Would the large companies and tools that we use today, like Google and Zoom and the mRNA vaccine, would they have existed had their founders not been able to move to countries where they are working and doing some of their best work? What about just cultural exchanges? I believe we are better as humanity because air travel exists. Why do I make this point? That's because air travel in its current state and current state of growth cannot continue to exist as it has, because the reality is, and we mentioned this, we actually start the book with a few charts, which was a conscious decision we took. We know that there are 29,000 airplanes in the sky today, and by 2050, there'll be 42,000. That's almost double. What this results in is currently aviation is over 2% of global CO2 emissions. This number is likely to rise to over 22%. That's 10x growth by 2050. And that's not because of just growth, but also because the other industries are decarbonizing faster. If I want to book an Uber Green today, a Tesla rolls up fully electric. And I can't fly on an electric plane tomorrow, even if I wanted to. The earliest you can do that is on SAS Scandinavian flying a Heart Aerospace aircraft in 2028, for which they have sold tickets, by the way. We mentioned that in the book. So I think it is very important to decarbonize aviation, even though it's hard. And we have to go at it both from inside existing large organizations, and we have to think about the outside as well. We have to think about the outsiders. So both the external transformation and the internal transformation need to happen at the same time.
Absolutely. It's about internal and external transition, as you mentioned. I think this would probably be a good time for us to segue into the very interesting manifesto that we have towards the end of the book. So, Dirk, why don't you tell me how you came up with the manifesto and what that actually means for the future of aviation and travel in general?
Yeah, so in the conclusion, we highlight some of the record temperatures and wildfires that have been seen from everywhere from Canada to Greece, over the past year, and the fact that climate change is becoming increasingly real for people around the world, and the focus is more and more on aviation's growing share of emissions, that 22% figure potentially by 2050 that Shashank has just mentioned. Now, one of the problems that the aviation industry has is, that there are a lot of people with, who are very sincere and with very good intentions. A lot of them who've appeared on the podcast and who you yourself have written about. But the industry does have a credibility problem. I saw the other day that Dan Rutherford from the ICCT, who is obviously featured in the book, he shared a post that was written by an IATA executive in 2009, which said that by 2017 we would be having 10% share of sustainable aviation fuel. Now, obviously, it's 2023, and we're nowhere near that. It's 0.05%. And that's in Europe, which is one of the more climate aware and regions of the of the world. So we put the manifesto together really to sort of dare the industry to commit to certain actions. To show that they are serious about sort of decarbonizing and to reaching net zero by 2050. If not before. And really, the 8 points we put forward were, first of all, we talk about the idea that growth has to be tied to sustainability. So you very often hear this phrase being used in the industry of decoupling emissions and the increase in greenhouse gases to growth. As Shashank said, we are not in favor of degrowth. We believe that that aviation is a good thing, that air travel is a good thing, and we want to widen the benefits that we ourselves have enjoyed out to more people around the world. But really, any growth has to be tied to a drop in the climate impact that the industry has. So the two need to work in tandem. And what's very important there is we need to talk in absolute terms as well. So we need to talk in absolute emissions. Very often, as you know, in this sector, you'll hear airlines come up and say, well, we've decreased our per seat CO2 emissions by XX%, which is meaningless if your absolute share is still going up. The second point is to combine incentives and mandates. We talked about money, about the fact that that only 16% of climate tech needs are currently being met, and there needs to be more incentives, such as the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which has already kickstarted the whole industry, measures like that should be implemented and introduced worldwide. Then you need to have mandates as well, such as in the European Union, with a Refuel 2030 mandates and the SAF initiatives that they put in place. And the two really have to work together, both the carrot and the stick. The polluter pays principle and a clean skies fund. That third point that comes down to, you'll see a lot of talk in the industry about, and from activists, about a frequent flyer tax. This idea that those who fly more should pay more. And the principle of it is something that we agree with. So last year I took 12 flights, and that very much makes me a frequent flyer. And it is completely fair that I should pay more for that than someone who in Europe is going, on the annual holiday to, let's say, to Tenerife or to Gran Canaria, or someone in India who's flying for the first time. But rather than it being a frequent flyer tax, which has a very punitive feel about it, we prefer to set a position as a clean skies fund. So a little bit like the fuel surcharges you sometimes get, when oil prices increase, that goes into a pooled fund to help decarbonize the industry. Other factors are obviously global equity, including the global south. One of the things is that almost every SAF producer right now is in North America or in Western Europe. In the Far East, there's one SAF refinery, which is in Singapore. That obviously has to be addressed because that is where the growth market is. Ensuring that aviation doesn't take more than its fair share, to be cognizant of the fact that the resources that will be needed to decarbonize aviation, both in terms of, let's say, feedstocks for SAF or in renewable electricity use, they are finite, and they need to be shared equitably with other industries. Transparency, accountability, and targets is our sixth point. So really, to sort of this idea that we often talk about, that you can't mark your own homework. If you publish sustainability targets, they have to be audited, and you have to have a credible, independent third party coming on board to say that what you're actually doing is really happening and it's above board. Cooperation and knowledge sharing. Shashank just talked about the SkyTeam Sustainable Flight Challenge. That is an excellent example of that, of airlines coming together to pool resources and knowledge. And then finally, to aim for what we call true zero and not net zero. So to foster, next generation propulsion systems such as hydrogen and electric. They might yet be a generation away, and between that time we'll need sustainable aviation fuel. But really, we should be aiming for a future where there is no climate impact whatsoever, and to fast charge the technology that makes that possible.
Absolutely. I think the manifesto serves as a guiding light for an industry that basically has no clear solutions at the moment. And I think it's important to bear all of these factors in mind while choosing not just a technology, but also going forth with, say, a said policy or a certain structure or framework. Now, those were the steps that Dirk mentioned that the industry requires. Now, Shashank, the book also touches upon actions that individuals can take. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, I think individuals have a lot here that they can do, we as individual travelers. And not all individuals are made equal. We highlight this in the book as well. As a traveler, I'll start with the traveler because there are many. Let's have this conversation. The next time you're flying, let's have this conversation on the dinner table with your friends. Hey, do we need to fly this long only for this trip? Is there a train alternative? Can we combine trips, for example? Let's have these honest conversations, because conversations spark ideas and ideas spark action. That's what I truly believe. But also, if you do decide to fly, I have personally combined work trips with leisure trips over the last 2 years. I call these workations, where I might have a 2 or 3 day work trip. I extend it to another week and just tag on, and I bring my family along. We have our family holiday at the end of it, and I've got some work done as well. Combines 2 trips into one, with the family holiday taken care of as well. If you are flying Indeed, then see if there are some credible offset methods that you can take, which the airline might be offering. You can buy sustainable aviation fuel on certain flights with certain airlines today, for example. There are some high-grade carbon offsets that are available as well. Can you do something to take care of your carbon footprint today? Try to fly long. If you're flying a flight, try to fly non-stop. That's something else I have really put into place in my own flying, where the cheapest option sometimes is 1 stop or 2 stop. But the one with the least carbon footprint is usually one that's non-stop. So use tools like Google Flights, or use an airline like United, which in its booking path shows you the carbon footprint of the aircraft that you're taking, a 767 versus a 777 versus a 787. And the 787 will burn less fuel per person for the same flight, for the same route. And it shows you your carbon footprint will be lower. So do that intelligent research. And these are simple things you can do as a traveler. We, of course, include a lot more tips in the book. But also, we know that a lot of the audience for this book will be airline executives or aviation executives or airline executives in the making, because my current book is already taught at 3 different universities. I am already in talks with universities to potentially have the new book as a feature in places like Embry-Riddle and Cranfield, which produce a lot of our aviation executives in the future. So if you're an aviation executive, I think it's important to ask, hey, where am I having the biggest impact in my career? If you are a C-level airline executive, for example, and instead of looking for your next C-level role in a larger airline, I would urge you to look at the outsiders who are featured in our book, as well as 20 other innovators to watch out for, because these guys, like I said earlier, do not have aviation background. But to scale from 1 test flight to 10 test flights to 100 aircraft on order, they need aviation expertise. And guess who has them? C-level executives at airlines today. So if you're a CMO, see how you can help Archer build a huge brand. If you are an airline CCO, see how you can help Heart Aerospace build a commercial model for regional flying. We've already seen certain airline executives move to these technology companies to share their expertise. And I think this is just one of the things existing airline executives can do, because they have influence. You have influence if you're listening. So think about where can you have the biggest impact in aviation in the next 10 years, and that will be in the sustainability realm.
Absolutely. I think using influence in the best way possible is in the interest of the industry at large. Thank you for articulating that so beautifully. If we could now move on to what your takeaways from the book were. So, Dirk, you have mentioned quite a few times earlier that you were a hydrogen skeptic. And now, of course, you find it more of a hopeful solution. How has your perspective about sustainability changed after researching so much and writing about the industry's change makers?
I think that the key takeaway for me is whatever the problem, there is a solution. Someone is inevitably working a solution for it. So you take the production of, let's say, sustainable aviation fuel. Now, SAF is generally made using a process called the Fischer-Tropsch method, which was invented by 2 German scientists, in, I believe, 1925. So it's a process for making synthetic fuels that's almost 100 years old. And it is very, very, very energy efficient. And one of the main criticisms that you'll find about e-fuel use is you'll hear, well, this takes up too much renewable energy. You had Carsten Spohr, the CEO of Lufthansa, the other week, saying that to use e-fuels on Lufthansa's fleet, you would be using, I think he said, half the total electricity consumption of Germany. But the thing is, there are people working on this. So in the book, again, we feature Air Company, and certain, Stafford Sheehan, one of the founders of Air Company, he has found a new process to make e-fuels rather than Fischer-Tropsch, which he says has more than double the efficiency. Now we're only at the start of this process, so it stands to reason that as the years go by, that will become even more efficient. I guess it's sort of that hydrogen. Once I looked into it a little bit more, then yes, I do see that there's a lot of potential, and that's why I said previously that if I had money to invest, I would put it into an electrolyzer company that helps produce green hydrogen, because hydrogen is very much is the Swiss Army knife that unlocks so much of aviation decarbonization. But I felt, feeling quite hopeful, as I said, that for every problem there is someone working on a solution. Be it hydrogen, be it SAF resource use, be it making more efficient batteries. Someone somewhere is already working on this. What we need is the investment and the help to help bring those products to market.
Absolutely. We need all the help we can get. So, Shashank, how was the book writing process for you? Since the two of you were writing the book together, did you have any difference of opinion? And if you did, what was your process of resolution?
Yeah, initially, like I shared earlier, we, I think, started off on the note, hey, let's just have 8 to 10 airlines. And we realized we were hitting dead ends. We had to change our entire approach. Then we said, let's have these shortlisted airlines and these shortlisted non-airlines. We, like I said, wrote entire chapters after doing interviews, realizing only that this might not last for 25 years. The book will be found 25 years from now in a library somewhere. And these stories need to be timeless. So that's when we realized we need to focus on innovators. We need to focus on the stories and the struggles and the triumphs of innovators. And that's what we decided to focus on. And like I shared earlier, we did the interviews together. Dirk wrote the first draft. Then we worked with the editor to get the book, each chapter to its final destination. And, it's been a long process of almost a year now to try to get this book to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. We at Simplifying definitely know how much you guys have been working at this. But even when you were working on the process, sustainable aviation is a very fast-moving field. How did you manage to keep up, and how did you ensure that the stories that you were putting in the book were going to be relevant for, say, decades to come?
I'm sure Dirk can highlight a bit more, but like I said, our focus was on timeless stories. So the journey of an individual or the journey of an innovator is timeless. It doesn't matter whether the technology currently is current or not. You're absolutely right. Technologies are changing all the time, especially in this fast evolving sustainable aviation field. But you know what? If you read about the struggles of Steve Jobs today about starting Apple in the beginning, it inspires you today. If you read about the struggles of Elon Musk, when he almost did not meet the payroll one Christmas Eve at Tesla in the early days, you relate to it. If you read the story today if you read Shoe Dog, the story of Nike and its founding, you relate to them. That was how we approached writing this book. These are stories of innovators that are timeless. We know and we acknowledge the fact that technologies will change. We just felt that this is an urgent and important situation that needs to be dealt with. Airlines need to decarbonize, and here are the innovators showing you how.
Laying the right foundation matters, and I guess that's what you're doing with the book. I think my next question would be, now that you guys are freshly out of finishing the book, what's your next project? What are you planning on writing next? I think let's start with Dirk first this time.
So, I think that we could produce many more editions of this book because there are so many great stories that didn't make it in. In fact, at the end, we have 10 more companies to watch, that are kind of innovators bubbling up onto the surface that we believe that people should keep an eye on. But there are literally dozens that we could take that could make for really interesting book chapters. And obviously, you yourself, through the work that you do at Simplifying, you see and come into contact with a lot of them. The other interesting industry, I think, where there's a lot of parallels to aviation is the maritime industry, because it faces many of the same challenges and many of the same technologies. From battery electric power to hydrogen, you see being used in maritime shipping, and there's a certain amount of synergy between those two. So I personally think that would be a very interesting next area to look at as well.
Well, Dirk is already thinking big here. I just want to make sure that this book is a success. It reaches the right people. It impacts the right minds. I want to make sure that this book spreads far and wide before I start thinking about the next thing. My first book came out 7 years ago. Since then, the first book has had 4 new editions. And I potentially think that this book can, like Dirk said, have more editions in the upcoming years, featuring more innovators, more technologies that are truly transforming aviation.
Okay, so that brings us to one of our final questions. It is the final question, actually. No, what tips do you have for people who are aspiring to write a book? How would you approach it? How should they go about it? Any tips you guys might want to share?
Having done this twice, I would say it's much easier if you do it with someone you trust and someone you respect. I did it once, the first time alone. It was very hard. I had an entire team, not just Simplifying team, but the publisher working with me. It took me 18 months. Right now, we managed to do this in just under a year, and that's thanks to all the heavy lifting that Dirk did and all the heavy lifting that the publisher did. I would not have been able to do this myself alone. So my big lesson is work with someone you respect and someone you trust. And in this case, that's been Dirk for me.
I think I would just say, persevere. That this is, you've got to recognize this is going to be much harder than you thought that it was going to be. But you have to stick with it. You have to, you have to accept that it's not going to be right the first time that you try it. And you've just got to, have the willpower, the stamina, if you like, to see it through in the end. And as Shashank says, as a result, we started this project in January. The last bit of writing was actually done in August. So so the material that you see is relatively recent, and that is really what I would say. And that was my takeaway from it.
Finally, to all those who are listening to this episode, we will be launching the book in person at multiple events this year. So if you're at the Skift Forum in Dallas, join me there. Happy to sign copies for you if you're attending. If you are in London for Aviation Carbon in November or for World Travel Market, Dirk and I will both be there in London signing books. And if you're at the Dubai Air Show, in late November, mid-November, please let us know. Happy to sign copies if you get it from Amazon, from a local bookstore, or hit us up. We might even send you an exclusive invite to the book launch, which we're doing for the industry there. So just shout out there for anyone who is a fan and would love to meet us.
Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen, and for the lovely insights about the book. Sustainable aviation is truly a very exciting sphere, and the pathways to net zero are, of course, really something that we all look forward to. That said, the medium term matters as well, and you've captured that really well in the book. As a reminder for the listeners, the book is now available on Amazon. The link can be found in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to Sustainability in the Air. Until our next episode, this is Ayushi signing off with Shashank and Dirk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ayushi.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simpliflying, that's simply with an i.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our supervising editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Meera Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimain is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.